At an elite school, money means everything. A scholarship student? She's invisible. But when a teacher humiliates her in front of everyone, they never expected her response. What she did next left them speechless. You won't believe this story. Watch now. You won't see this coming. Ravenshire Academy wasn't just a school. It was a fortress of privilege. The marble hallways gleamed under the glow of crystal chandeliers. The rhythmic ticking of antique clocks served as a silent reminder of an unyielding tradition. Golden plaques, oil-painted portraits of illustrious alumni, politicians, lawyers, CEOs lined the walls, each one a testament to a singular truth. This was a place for the worthy. But here, worthy didn't mean talented. It didn't mean intelligent. It meant wealth, power, legacy, and scholarship students like Imani Brooks. They were nothing more than unwelcome guests. Their very presence was an uncomfortable reminder that not everyone at Ravenshire could slip into its expensive uniforms without a second thought. Imani Brooks, the outsider. Imani walked through the hallways, her worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder, the soles of her scuffed shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor. She was used to the stares, the whispers, the casual contempt of the wealthy. Let them look. Let them talk. She didn't have time to care. She had a goal. Every year, Ravenshire Academy held a prestigious debate competition. The winner didn't just earn a trophy, they earned a ticket to the most exclusive forums in the country. For Imani, this wasn't just a contest. It was the only way out. But the moment she stood before the class and announced her intent to compete, the room erupted in laughter. Does she actually think she stands a chance? What does a scholarship kid know about debate? A boy in a tailored blazer scoffed. A girl with platinum blonde hair shook her head in disbelief. But no one looked more amused, more cruelly entertained than Charlotte Davenport. Charlotte Davenport. Daichi, one in control Charlotte rose from her seat, moving toward Imani with deliberate grace. Her golden hair was pulled back in an intricate twist, her uniform pristine, her heels clicking softly against the floor like a queen descending from her throne. She tilted her head, offering a smile as sweet as honey, laced with venom. Tell me, you see the irony in this? Charlotte murmured, her voice as smooth as glass but cold enough to cut. A scholarship girl thinking she belongs on that stage? You don't even deserve to stand in the same room as real competitors. The room fell silent. This wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. Charlotte wasn't just another student. She was the daughter of a senator, trained by the best, a champion in her own right. Victory wasn't a possibility for her, it was an expectation. And now, some nobody dared to step into her arena? Mr. Whitmore. The gatekeeper. The tension was shattered by the smooth, measured voice of Mr. Whitmore, Ravenshire's music instructor. He stood by his desk, arms crossed, eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. Debate is an art for the elite, Miss Brooks, not for people like you. There was no malice in his tone, no mockery. But that only made it worse. He didn't need to insult her, because to him, she simply didn't exist. Imani felt her pulse hammering in her ears. She knew this would happen. She knew they would look down on her. She knew Charlotte would laugh. She knew Mr. Whitmore would never see her as anything more than an afterthought. But there was one thing they didn't know. She wasn't backing down. The moment everything changed, Imani tightened her grip on her backpack. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. the portrait hanging on the classroom wall. A man, a gaze full of quiet defiance. Martin Luther King Jr. beneath the portrait, a quote she had read 100 times in the library. But today, the words struck her differently. Everybody can be great, because anybody can serve. Something ignited inside her. A spark, small but unshakable. Charlotte had wealth. She had power. Mr. Whitmore had his prejudice. But Imani, she had a voice, and she would use it. For the first time that class, she lifted her chin and met Charlotte's eyes, unflinching, unshaken, and she made a decision. She would not back down. She never imagined that standing up for herself would shake the very foundation of Ravenshire Academy. The second period bell rang, and Ravenshire Academy's hallways exploded into a frenzy. Students clad in pristine uniforms strode in clusters, their hushed laughter and fleeting glances like invisible knives slicing through the air. Imani walked, sensing something was off. The air felt different today. The whispers behind her back were louder than usual. A group of girls leaned against their lockers, giggling, watching her like she was some kind of spectacle. Then she saw Jared Moore, captain of the debate team, staring at his phone. When their eyes met, he smirked. And then, slowly, he turned. His screen toward her. A message, anonymous, was circulating in the school's group chat. Imani Brooks just wants attention. She knows she'll lose, but she's putting on a show anyway. Pathetic. Her stomach clenched. Charlotte. Of course, it was her. This was what Charlotte did. Manipulate perception, twist reality, destroy her opponents without ever lifting a finger. But this time, it wasn't the rumor that stung. It was how easily people believed it. Even students who had never spoken to her nodded in agreement. Their pitying glances, their quiet chuckles, none of them questioned it. By the time Imani stepped into music class, the conversations cut off abruptly. For a moment, silence. Then, the whispers resumed. Louder. She set her bag down, her fingers curled into fists, but she couldn't let them see her falter. Charlotte sat 2 rows away, effortlessly poised, legs crossed, her lips curved in amusement, like a predator toying with its prey. "Oh, hi, Imani." Charlotte's voice rang out, deceptively sweet. "Did you sleep well? Or were you too busy practicing your little performance?" The class erupted into laughter. Imani didn't respond. She just looked at Charlotte, unwavering, and for a fleeting second, she saw it. Surprise flickering across Charlotte's face, just for a moment. But then, the smirk returned. "You look tense," Charlotte cooed. "Maybe I can help with that?" She turned to Mr. Whitmore, her tone dripping with honey. "Mr. Whitmore, don't you think it's time for Imani to showcase her debating skills?" The trap. The world slowed. Imani's eyes flickered across the room, eager faces waiting for the show. She looked at Mr. Whitmore. He stood motionless, his expression unreadable, like Charlotte had merely stated the obvious. "Indeed, Imani," he said, his voice low and steady. "If you truly believe you can win, prove it now." A murmur spread through the room. Students straightened in their seats. Anticipation, thick in the air. The trap was closing in. A spontaneous speech. Right here, right now. No preparation, no second chances. If she failed, she wouldn't just embarrass herself. She would confirm everything they believed about her. She would destroy herself before they even had to. Charlotte tilted her head, voice laced with mock concern. "What's wrong, Imani? Are you scared?" That was what she wanted. To rattle her. To make her afraid. Imani inhaled deeply. She stood, stepped forward, and the room fell into absolute silence. Every eye was on her. She would not crumble. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Her throat locked. Her fists clenched at her sides, but no sound escaped. And then, a scoff. "Charlotte! Oh, I see. I was wrong." Charlotte's voice dripped with feigned sympathy. "You're not putting on a show after all. You just have nothing to say." Laughter rippled through the class. Imani's face burned. She wanted to speak, to fight back, but the words wouldn't come. She had never felt so powerless. Charlotte sighed, shaking her head in mock disappointment. "How embarrassing!" And the class laughed louder. The breaking point, by the time the lesson ended, Imani was already moving. She pushed through the hallways, avoiding their eyes, their stares. Her fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. She had failed. She had given them exactly what they wanted. A voice echoed in her mind, one she didn't want to hear. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." But then she stopped. Her eyes landed on a portrait in the library. Martin Luther King Jr. This time she didn't just read the words beneath it. She felt them. Everybody can be great, because anybody can serve. Words could be stolen, but her spirit couldn't. She wouldn't let Charlotte take her voice. She wouldn't let Mr. Whitmore turn her into a lesson in failure. She couldn't speak today, but she would. She would stand on that stage. And next time, the entire school would have to listen. The Awakening. By the time Imani left the library, the sky had darkened. The winter wind swept through Ravenshire Academy's empty courtyard, rattling the bare branches outside the dorms like skeletal fingers. The wealthy students had long since left for their luxurious apartments, their sleek cars gliding away from the parking lot. The scholarship dorm stood apart from the main campus. Older, simpler, no extravagant furniture, no velvet carpets, just small rooms with the glow of warm light spilling from their windows. Imani walked briskly down the hallway, breath sharp in the cold air, fingers clutching the strap of her backpack as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. She didn't want anyone to see her face. She didn't want anyone to see the shame weighing down her chest. The door slammed shut behind her. Imani leaned against it for a few seconds, eyes squeezed shut, trying to push away the echoes of the day. Charlotte's scoff, the classroom's laughter. Mr. Whitmore's arms crossed, his gaze indifferent. "You don't even deserve to stand on that stage." Charlotte's voice played in her, mind like a broken record, looping over and over again. She hated it. She hated this. She yanked her backpack off her shoulder and tossed it onto the bed. The room was small, neat, but empty. No family pictures. No extravagant decorations like Charlotte's dorm. Just a wooden desk, a worn-out chair, and a single mirror hanging on the wall. She collapsed onto the bed, exhaling sharply. Her hand fumbled for her phone. She needed a voice. One, stronger than the doubt in her head. Scrolling through YouTube, she searched. And then, she found it. Martin Luther King Jr. "I have a dream." She pressed play. A deep, unwavering voice filled the silence, cutting through the night like an echo from the past. "I have a dream." Imani closed her eyes, listening. That one day, people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Her eyes snapped open. She sat up, staring at the screen. This time, she wasn't just hearing the words, she was feeling them. Not everyone was born with a voice, but everyone had the choice not to stay silent. Imani straightened, her eyes locked onto the mirror. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She stood, stepped toward her reflection, took a deep breath, and spoke. "I have a dream." Her voice was quiet, too weak. She tried again. "I have a dream." Her throat trembled, but the sound was stronger. She clenched her fists. She thought of Charlotte. The ridicule. "I have a dream." She stopped, stared at herself, and then she realized. She wasn't afraid of Charlotte. She wasn't afraid of Mr. Whitmore. The only person she had feared was herself. She had let her own fears steal her voice. Not anymore. This time, she was taking control. The first sign of hope. The next morning, when Imani walked into the library, something unexpected was waiting for her. On her usual study table lay a fresh stack of documents. She frowned, picking them up. The art of oratory, the power of speech. She flipped through the first few pages. Scribbled notes lined the margins in neat pencil strokes. Your voice is your weapon. If you learn to wield it, no one can silence you. She recognized the handwriting. Ms. Patel. No one had stood by her. No one, except the only literature teacher at Ravenshire Academy willing to defy the system. Imani gripped the papers, something stirring deep inside her. Hope. She wasn't alone. The fighter awakens. That night, Angela Brooks didn't sleep. Standing outside her daughter's door, she peeked through the small gap and saw what Imani was doing. She was practicing. No hesitation, no fear, just a girl in the dark, reciting a speech over and over again, her voice growing steadier, stronger with every word. Angela clenched her hands. She knew she couldn't shield Imani from the cruelty of this world, but she could let her daughter learn how to fight back. She wouldn't stop her, because her little girl was becoming a warrior. If you're rooting for Imani, drop a comment below with, "You got this, Imani," and let's show her some love. Ravenshire Academy had never felt this tense. The grand auditorium, usually reserved for elite ceremonies and events meant only for the privileged, was packed to the brim. Not a single empty seat. From the judges' panel in the front row to the very last aisle in the back, every pair of eyes was locked onto the stage, a stage bathed in golden light from the crystal chandeliers above. The velvet curtains hung heavy on either side, like a gateway about to open into a battle. One fought not with weapons, but with words. Yet beneath the surface, there was one unspoken truth. Charlotte Davenport was going to win, and Imani Brooks? She was just a name on the roster. A side character in the story Charlotte had already written. The announcer called the first name, Charlotte Davenport. The moment her foot touched the stage, the room thundered with applause. Charlotte didn't walk. She glided, moving with the elegance of a queen ascending her throne. Every step deliberate, every motion laced with certainty, as if the victory had been hers from the moment she entered the room. At the center of the stage, she paused. Her sharp blue eyes swept across the crowd. A slow, measured smile, poised, regal. Charlotte took the mic. And then she began. Her words were razor-sharp, slicing through the air with precision. Her voice, polished, controlled, flawless. She spoke of leadership, of the responsibility, of the elite, of forging a generation strong enough to shape the world. Every sentence measured, every pause intentional, every glance carefully placed. It was perfect, but it was hollow. A speech so meticulously crafted that it bled out all traces of humanity. Sitting backstage, Imani listened. She heard every word, but she felt nothing. There was no fire, no conviction, no soul. Charlotte wasn't speaking. She was performing. The trap is set. The applause was deafening as Charlotte took her bow. The entire auditorium erupted in cheers, a standing ovation rippling through the crowd. She stepped down from the stage, carrying herself with the effortless grace of a reigning champion. And when she passed Imani, she stopped, leaning in just enough for only the two of them to hear. Charlotte whispered, "Your turn, Brooks. Do your best, though we both know how this ends." Then she smiled, not the smile of a winner, the smile of a predator who had already caught its prey. Because she knew Imani would fail. The turning point, Imani's heart pounded. But this time, it wasn't fear. She thought of it all. The taunts in the classroom, Mr. Whitmore's dismissive stare, the nights she spent alone, practicing until her voice shook. And she remembered her mother, standing in the doorway, silent, watching, not interfering, not stopping her, because she knew. Imani was no longer the girl who had been humiliated in that classroom. She was no longer afraid of losing control. She was no longer afraid of her own voice. Charlotte wouldn't write this story for her. Not this time. Imani inhaled, stepped forward. Every eye in the auditorium turned to her. The curtains pulled back. And this time, they would listen. The auditorium at Ravenshire Academy was still buzzing from Charlotte's performance. Low murmurs filled the air, students exchanging knowing glances. As far as they were concerned, the competition was over. Charlotte had won. Now, all that was left was for Imani to walk onto that stage and fail. The judges sat upright, fingers brushing against their score sheets. Some had already picked up their pens, ready to strike out the name of the unknown girl about to take the stage. And then she appeared. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Every movement was deliberate. Each step echoed through the silent auditorium. 1, 2, 3. She didn't avert her gaze. She looked at every single person, at the ones who had laughed at her, at the teachers who had dismissed her, at Charlotte, seated in the front row, still wearing that smug, victorious smile. But the moment their eyes met, that smile faltered. Imani was no longer the girl from that classroom. She was no longer afraid. She reached the center of the EHI stage, no bow, no greeting, just a deep inhale. And then she spoke. When I speak, there will be those who refuse to listen. The whispers in the room died instantly, but that has never stopped great voices from being heard. A pause, and then an unseen explosion. She didn't need a microphone. She didn't need flawless technique like Charlotte. She spoke with life, with truth. She wasn't reciting a speech. She was living it. She wasn't preaching. She was sharing. She spoke of silence, of people like her, scholarship, students, outsiders, dreams crushed before they even had a chance to grow. Every word poured straight from her soul. No one blinked. No one whispered. They were listening. In that moment, Imani controlled the entire room. She made them feel. Charlotte had delivered a perfect speech. But Imani delivered the truth. And truth carried more weight than the most polished words ever could. This was no longer a competition. This was a reckoning. She made Charlotte go pale. She made Mr. Whitmore grip his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. She made an entire auditorium forget to breathe because they were no longer hearing a scholarship girl speak. They were hearing a leader. And when the final words left her lips, she fell silent. The entire auditorium held its breath. No one dared to break the stillness, not because they didn't know how to react, but because they were still caught in what she had just done. Then, a single clap, another, and then the entire room stood. Thunderous applause. The very people who had mocked her, now on their feet, cheering. The judges who had once held their pens, ready to dismiss her, now setting them down in awe. And Charlotte, frozen, unmoving. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of attention. For the first time in her life, someone had beaten her, not with tricks, not with power, but with truth. Imani didn't need to look at the judges. She didn't. To need to hear the final results, she already knew. Charlotte had connections, but Imani had the people. And that was what made a true speaker. If this moment gave you chills, share this video with someone who needs to hear Imani's story. Let's spread the message that talent has no boundaries. The world seemed to stop. Had they really just called her name? Imani stood frozen, the roar of the auditorium muffled beneath the crashing wave of emotions rising in her chest. She had won? No mistake? No fluke? Not luck? Not pity? She had earned this. The grand auditorium of Ravenshire Academy was wrapped in unbearable tension. Mere moments ago, this very room had erupted at the force of Imani's speech. But now, only anticipation remained. Thick, heavy. On stage, Imani stood tall, her heart pounding like a war drum. Beside her, Charlotte remained poised, her gaze locked onto the head judge, Eleanor Hastings. Charlotte couldn't lose. She had been raised knowing that every competition had rules, and the rules of Ravenshire Academy were clear. The winner had to be worthy. The winner had to be powerful. The winner had to be her. No other outcome made sense. And so, Charlotte knew she would win, because there could be no other ending. The murmurs fell silent as Eleanor Hastings placed her pen down. No one had seen her write. No one knew what she had been thinking. But everyone knew. She was the final authority. Her voice rang through the hall. We have heard 2 exceptional speeches today. 1 second passed, then 2. Every eye turned to Charlotte. She wasn't nervous. This was routine. The suspense, the wait, it was all part of the moment before she was crowned. She had lived this moment before, but only one speaker truly moved us. Imani's hands clenched, not in fear, but in hope. And then, the first place winner is Imani Brooks. The room erupted. Applause. Cheering. Students leapt to their feet, some shouting her name. The very people who had mocked her, now celebrating her. The judges who had once dismissed her, now nodding in respect. And Charlotte couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, unblinking, unmoving, as if time itself had abandoned her. She had lost. No, impossible. She had trained relentlessly. She had studied under the best coaches. She had prepared for everything. She had every advantage. Then why? Why? She staggered back a step. Her expensive heels scraped against the stage floor. Her own body felt foreign, unsteady. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Davenport didn't know what to do. From the judges' panel, Mr. Whitmore's brow creased. His fingers tightened around his pen, but he said nothing, because he couldn't deny the truth. The girl he had dismissed, the girl he had been certain would fail. She had won, and there was nothing he could do to change it. Imani's feet felt rooted to the stage, not from fear, but because she had never imagined this moment where she no longer needed permission to speak. A lump formed in her throat. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found her mother. Angela Brooks stood at the very back of the room. Unnoticed, just a janitor among suits and designer dresses. But Imani saw her. This room could overlook her, but Imani never would. Their eyes met. Angela didn't cry. She didn't need to. She only smiled. No words, no tears, just pride. And for Imani, that was worth more than victory itself. A dull ringing filled Charlotte's ears, everything blurred. The applause, the beaming faces, the blinding lights. It all drowned her in a suffocating haze. Impossible. Impossible. She had trained harder than anyone. She had learned from masters. She had spent her entire life preparing for this. Then why? Why? Her mind reeled. Her breath quickened. For the first time, she wasn't the winner. Her fingers trembled, but she couldn't let them see. She had to fight back. She had to. Charlotte spun toward the judges, desperation flaring in her eyes. But my speech was technically superior. I spent months training with the top debate coaches. Her voice lacked its usual composure. It wavered. She was pleading, and the entire room saw it. Every gaze turned to Charlotte. No admiration, no respect, only pity. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Davenport was the pathetic one, and nothing terrified her more. A soft click of the tongue. Eleanor Hastings raised the microphone once more. No anger, no sympathy, only truth. She didn't look at Charlotte as though she were a brilliant speaker who had narrowly lost. She looked at her as though she had never understood what it meant to speak at all. Technique is just a tool. What makes a great speaker is heart. Charlotte stiffened. A single sentence shattered everything she had built her world around, because she knew. Deep down, she had always known. But now, so did everyone else. She hadn't lost because she was weak. She had lost because she had never believed in the words she spoke. She had skill, but no emotion. She had knowledge, but no conviction. She had power, but no heart. And that truth would haunt her forever. Charlotte collapsed into her seat. She had nothing left to say, because the truth had spoken for itself. The fall of Charlotte Davenport. The auditorium doors swung open. Charlotte stormed out. She didn't run. She never ran. But every step she took on the marble floor echoed with barely restrained fury. The sharp clicks of her heels filled the empty corridor, cutting through the suffocating silence. The humiliation still burned, raw and unrelenting. Her breath came faster. She had lost. Not just a simple loss. This was a collapse. All her life, Charlotte had been the winner. She was born to win. Yet, today, before everyone, she had been defeated by a scholarship student, and worse, no one defended her. Not a single person. The doors opened again, but this time, it wasn't someone running from disgrace. It was Imani Brooks. She didn't rush. She didn't lower her head. She walked slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of every step beneath her. She was still in disbelief, not over winning, but over the realization that she wasn't afraid anymore. This hallway was no longer a place she tried to escape. It was a path she had conquered. Charlotte stopped. Imani did too. They stood face to face. One last battle. No stage needed. Charlotte couldn't take it. Imani's silence was more brutal than any insult. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood there, and that look, steady, fearless, set Charlotte's insides on fire. Her hands curled into fists, her voice sharp as ice. "Don't think this win makes you my equal, Brooks. You're just a rat scurrying through a castle that doesn't belong to you. And sooner or later, you'll be thrown out." The words weren't just meant to wound Imani. They were meant to soothe Charlotte's own pain, because she needed to believe it. She needed to believe that the world still worked the way it always had, that injustice still reigned, that she was still the rightful ruler of this place, and Imani was nothing more than a passing guest. Imani didn't flinch. She wasn't the same girl who had first walked into Ravenshire Academy. She wasn't the girl who bowed her head at cruel words. She wasn't the girl who stood frozen in a classroom when a teacher forced her to speak. Today, she stood firm, and when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. "Maybe you're right." Charlotte narrowed her eyes, unsure of what Imani meant. But today, it's you who's been cast out. The hallway felt colder. Charlotte froze. She wanted to argue. She wanted to scoff, to sneer like she always did. But she couldn't, because deep down, some part of her knew Imani was right. Charlotte had spent her life in a world where everything was under her control. She controlled her friends. She controlled her teachers. She controlled her reputation. But for the first time, she controlled nothing. No one stood beside her. No one defended her. Today, Charlotte was the one left behind. The girl who had once ruled this school, brought down by a single speech. The guardian of the old order from a distance, a pair of watchful eyes observed. Mr. Whitmore. Arms crossed, leaning against the cold stone wall. He had seen everything. Charlotte, the student he had trusted to win, had lost. Imani, the student he had been certain would fail, had stood victorious, and now he had nothing to say. He should have protested. He should have found a way to overturn the results, but he couldn't, because the truth was undeniable. Imani had won fair and square, and he hated that. But no matter how much he despised it, he couldn't change reality. End of a war, Imani didn't say another word. She walked away. She didn't need to look back at Charlotte, because Charlotte was no longer a threat. No revenge needed. No satisfaction required. Her victory had spoken for itself. Charlotte remained frozen, alone in the vast hallway. No friends at her side. No crowd chanting her name. Just silence. And herself. Imani kept walking, but this time she didn't feel out of place. No more fear. No more doubt. For the first time, she knew she belonged. A voice that could not be silenced. The Boston night was eerily still. No more deafening applause, no more judgmental stares, no more whispers of doubt or glances of disdain. Ravenshire Academy still stood, rigid in its traditions and unyielding in its hierarchy. But for Imani, the world had shifted. She was no longer on the outside looking in. Tonight, she walked home with a trophy in her hands. Tonight, she no longer felt small. A warm glow spilled from the windows of a modest apartment. Inside, Angela Brooks stood quietly, her gaze fixed on the night sky. She was waiting, not for a result, but for her daughter to return. Not just home, but to herself. The door creaked open. Angela turned, and when she saw her daughter, her breath caught in her throat. Imani stood in the doorway. No more doubt on her face, only a smile, steady, unburdened, real. The apartment light reflected off the trophy in her hands, making it shimmer like a star. Angela blinked, her throat tightening, but she didn't need to ask. She knew. Imani had done it. She had won. Imani stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate, wanting to engrave this moment into her soul. And then Angela opened her arms. Without hesitation, Imani fell into them, her hands clutched at her mother's sweater like a child seeking refuge. And for the first time in days, in weeks, in years, she let herself break. "Mom, they listened to me." Her voice cracked, trembling on the edge of a sob. But Angela heard it. She heard everything. She held her daughter tighter, her hand gently rubbing Imani's back. "I always knew you would make them listen." A soft smile graced her lips, because she had always believed. The next step, after a moment, Imani pulled away, inhaling deeply, grounding herself. Her eyes drifted around the small apartment, the place that had witnessed her struggles, her doubts, her dreams. Nothing had changed, but she had. And then she saw it. On the table, an open application. Bold letters at the top made her breath hitch. National Debate Championship. Imani couldn't look away. Beside the form lay a pen, placed carefully, as if someone had left it there just for her. She turned to her mother, eyes filled with silent questions. Angela simply smiled, her fingers lightly tapping the paper. "Tonight, you showed them who you are." Her voice was steady, certain. "But this isn't the end, Imani. This is just the beginning." Imani swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the paper. A national competition, a bigger stage, a chance to carry her voice even further. She took a deep breath. Her gaze shifted to the trophy in her hands, then to her mother's unwavering eyes. And for the first time, she believed she could go further. A declaration that could not be ignored. She set the trophy down, gently, but with purpose. Then, she met her mother's gaze, met her own reflection in the window, met the future waiting ahead. And with a voice steadier than ever, she whispered, "Talent has no social class. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong." Angela's smile deepened. "Then, don't let anyone stop you from moving forward." Imani tightened her grip on the pen. And then, she signed her name. The moment the ink touched the paper, a new journey began. She was no longer just a scholarship student looked down upon. She was no longer the girl forced into silence. She was a speaker, and her voice would never be silenced again. Imani's journey is a testament to the fact that talent knows no boundaries. No matter where you come from, your voice matters. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift.